Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how are you doing this week?
Back from vacation and doing great. How about you, Eric?
I'm doing fine. You know, unfortunately, at the time that we record this, there's still a lot going on. Hurricane Irma is currently hitting Florida. Parts of Texas are still bailing out from Hurricane Harvey. Mexico, we just had an 8.1 earthquake. And we are recording this on September 11th, of course, the anniversary of the attack on the World Trade Center and Pentagon. So we thought, with all of this going on, it was appropriate to talk about crises and how you can get through them. You know, we've talked a lot about planning, but there's a great quote by Mike Tyson. Everybody has a plan until you get hit in the face. And it's great to have a plan to get through a problem. But when that crisis hits, a lot of times plans go out the window. There's a military saying that no plan survives contact with the enemy. You need to be able to think on your feet. You need to be able to figure out what you're going to do next. And that's what we're going to talk about. And a lot of it is paying attention to what's going on and your perception of it. And I'll say, there was a news story, one of these soft stories that they do for public interest on the local news a couple of days ago that actually aggravated me. Because this woman was getting married. She had her wedding set for a cruise ship. And because of the hurricane, the cruise was canceled. Now, the cruise company refunded all of their money, so they weren't out any money. But this whole thing was about how this woman had to scramble to be able to get married when they planned to. And all of the trouble she was going through to make this happen. And it absolutely infuriated me. Because this was a matter of perspective that this woman should not have. Her wedding was postponed. And she's whining about this while people are losing everything they own.
And some people are losing their lives too.
Yes. People have died in these hurricanes, and this woman is complaining about her not being able to have the wedding she wanted. And I thought, this is a matter of perspective, and she is in the wrong mindset. Because she could very easily have postponed the wedding. She could have gotten married in her backyard. She's a Connecticut resident. It's not like she was anywhere that the hurricane was going to affect her. There were hundreds of things she could have done without making a fuss. And yet she chose to wallow over how terrible it was that she was inconvenienced by this.
Yeah, hopefully she is possibly kicking herself for doing that when she finally does think about perspective, because that's one thing that we own. And obviously, in crisis times, it's so important to take a look at the total picture of things and realize that even though this, maybe your power is out or maybe this or that or whatever, you don't have it as bad as a whole lot of other people that are going through the same thing right now. And if you are, hopefully you're in a support situation where you're getting together. And obviously preparation and anticipation is a big part of that. But perspective really is the most important way to get through this, because if you can put things in perspective and keep your mindset as positive as it can be about different things going on, realizing that that's going to happen, and prepare yourself for that. And we've talked a lot about mindfulness and just, shuffling thoughts and so on and so forth, and emphasizing positives. It's so important to have a practice going on to prepare yourself for crises like this.
Absolutely. And I think the first step towards overcoming a crisis is really objectively looking at whether it's a crisis at all. I mean, so many of us use the word crisis. Oh, we're having a crisis at the office. We're having and what is that crisis? Well, your kid's got a cold and you have to take them to the doctor. So you have to, call in from work. You can't be there. This is not a crisis. Kids get sick every day. If your child has a cold, it's not life-threatening. It's not a crisis. We lost an account at work. There's a line in Mad Men that the day you sign a client is the day the client starts leaving you. Losing an account is not a crisis. Getting hit with a Category 5 hurricane is a crisis.
Absolutely.
So you really do have to look, take a step back and go, okay, what is this really costing me? How bad is this really? Am I losing my life? Is somebody I know losing their life? Am I losing everything I own? Am I losing my income? You have to put things in perspective and go, okay, it's a problem, but it's not a crisis. And making that differentiation is a big step. Because people get very nervous in crises, and they should. People tend to panic when a crisis hits, which they shouldn't, but it's hard not to do. But if you take that step back to look at what you're going through and determine, well, is it really a crisis? Or is it a momentary hiccup? Is it a problem that you just have to, take care of and move on from? That can keep you from going, okay, I've got a handle on this. I don't have to panic. So it's very important to keep everything in perspective and not just immediately jump to everything being a crisis.
Yeah, it's time for you just to sit back, take a little deep breath, and analyze things, observe before judging, and then taking action. So it's really how you handle things, which is something that you have to work on. As you mentioned, I mean, obviously with the bride and so on and so forth, that's an automatic reaction. What about me? And so on and so forth. You have millions and millions of people that are affected by this. And there's all different types of definitions for it, but it's how you put things in perspective and realize that, again, there's other people out there who have it at least as bad or worse. And it's really, really time to get back to your own human source and realize that, we're all together in this.
Right. And so much of it is how you respond. Anything that comes your way can be made so much better or so much worse based on your reaction. I mean, yeah. I remember what could easily be classified as one of the worst weeks of my life. It was back in it was July 2000. In July 2001, I had been laid off from my job. Because I didn't have any income, my landlord let me know my lease was not going to be renewed. So right there, I've lost my job, I've lost my home. A few days after this, same week though, my grandmother passes away. And I remember we had a get-together planned for the Sunday of this week. A bunch of the people who had been laid off, and we were, sort of figuring out what to do. And one of the people who was there said, well, they say the three most stressful things is to lose a job, lose a home, and lose a loved one. And I just went, well, I just hit the hat trick.
Yeah.
It would have been very easy for me to just curl up in a ball and,
Absolutely.
But I've always looked at things, well, if I don't do something about it, then nothing is going to get done. So that was it was shortly after that I went to my very first networking event with other people who were looking for jobs and people who were looking to hire. I kicked my freelance work into high gear. I had always been doing freelance work on the side, really pushed that to make sure I had some income coming in. And we started figuring out where we were going to live. Now, was this a crisis? I don't know. It could, I lost a lot. Maybe it could be considered a crisis. But because
our listening audience probably agrees that it is.
Yeah. But because I didn't dwell on it, and I took care of things as they came up, because I've always been in the mindset is whatever comes along, we have to handle it. There really isn't another option. Your options are take care of the problem or give up. So we moved on. It was not easy. And I lived in New York. I was living in New York City at the time. Remember, this is mid-July 2001. So it was only 2 months later that 9/11 hit and the entire economy of New York City, went to hell. So it was an incredibly difficult time. But we took things step by step, one thing at a time, and we just moved forward as best we could. And I think that's actually a big thing, is anything can be overwhelming when it hits. But when you break it down and you just take things one step at a time, it's much easier to deal with.
Yeah, it's all about planning, and it's about how you react to things. There's different types of crises out there. We're talking a lot about natural disasters. We're talking about work, which is a financial crisis and that kind of thing. But there's different types of crises out there where you can actually sit down and plan a couple of things if you identify the what ifs. We've talked about this before as far as, unexpected things happening to businesses and so on and so forth. So if you take a look at the different things, obviously there's different plans that you can have. For the crisis like we're having now with the hurricane, obviously we're talking about shelter, we're talking about food, we're talking about power, different things and so on and so forth. And just being aware of what's out there to help you out is really important. But it's planning, even though you don't know exactly what's going to happen. If you have a little bit of planning in there so that you have some idea of how you're going to react to things, it's going to help out a lot.
Absolutely. And the time to plan for this is not when it's on your doorstep, but it's, when you're not worrying about it, that you can take time and figure out. I remember when I moved to Connecticut, I was warned that in the winters, my area tended to suffer power outages. So we moved here in August. I didn't wait for winter. We went out. We got portable heaters that didn't rely on the electricity. We had flashlights, candles, the whole thing, and we were ready just in case that happened. As it turned out, the people that warned me were right. Power here goes out quite often. But it's always good to, stop and figure out what you need. And in cases of natural disasters, the FEMA website actually has a preparation manual that you can download with all sorts of tips and equipment you can use. And when you look into it, a lot of the things you would need to stock for an emergency, like tornado hitting, a hurricane, blizzards, superstorm, etc., are not terribly expensive. You can get a package of emergency Mylar blankets, which keep your body heat in case of a blizzard or storm in the winter, and it costs maybe $20. There are water filtration systems that also between $20 and $40. You literally put it on top of a water bottle and and pour the water through to filter it. There are backpacks actually that I've seen that include survival equipment for 5 people for a week that run about $200. So we're not talking about breaking the bank to prepare. You're not spending so much money that you feel, well, if this disaster never hits, I wasted my money.
Yeah, and more these days too, communities are planning for things like this with, shelters and so on and so forth. Obviously, I think it's a whole lot worse for a hurricane where people are going to be down for a long time. But, since we had our big blizzard in October 6 years ago in 2011, you've seen Eversource out there doing a whole lot of tree work and preventative things and so on and so forth, working on the grids and so on so that things are going to be less in duration and that kind of thing. And
for those listeners who are outside the New England area, Eversource is our local power company.
Yes. And, what happened was in October of 2011, we had a foot of snow, and we'd never had more than an inch or two of snow in October before. And there were still leaves on the trees, and a lot of places were out of power for well over a week back then. And the main culprit was trees falling down on power lines. So they've done a lot of work on that. And, they've worked with the power grids too, so that if the power goes out, it automatically switches over. They've done a whole lot of work then. And so we're a lot less vulnerable to longer things there. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of different ways that you can hedge against that. And, communities with the shelters and so on and so forth are really, really important too. And there's a whole lot more of that being set up behind the scenes so that we have the thens for the ifs.
Absolutely. And there's something that every one of us can do, not to help our own dealing with the crisis, but to help others when natural disasters, medical disasters, things like diseases, E. coli, things like this hit. The Red Cross always sends out a call for blood. And what most people don't realize is that when you donate blood, they can only keep that blood for, I think it's about 6 weeks to 2 months. And then after that, if it's not used, they have to get rid of it because it's no good anymore. So there's a constant need for people to donate blood, whether there's an ongoing emergency or something imminent or not. That need always exists. So if you can, contact your local Red Cross office, find out where a blood drive is, and give blood.
Absolutely. I mean, you're leaning guilty on me, Eric. I haven't done that in a long, long time, but it's it's so important. That's one of the things that we can do just as a human being to help our brothers and sisters out there. So I know, once you get on their list and so on and so forth, you get calls periodically reminding you and so on. And it would behoove you from time to time, including the person in the mirror who's talking to you, to go out and do their part.
Absolutely. There are nonprofits who are there to help people in times of need. But if we don't help them do their job, they're not going to be able to. And that's organizations like the Red Cross, like AmeriCares, who has been flying relief supplies to Texas. They've already said they've got things set to go to Florida as soon as the hurricane moves out. There are local groups all over, and just because a group is local doesn't mean they're not participating when a crisis is somewhere else. The Connecticut Humane Society, for example, they handle animals here in Connecticut, but they just took in a large number of sick animals from Texas who were victims of the hurricanes. They were separated from their families. They had no homes. There's not enough shelters in the area to handle all of the animals. So they were shipped up here to Connecticut. Connecticut Humane also has a team on the ground in Texas helping out with animals. So just because something is a local nonprofit doesn't mean they're not pitching in when the crisis is somewhere else.
No, and the utilities too. I mean, we have a bunch of people from Connecticut going down now to help out in Texas and Florida, just like they came and helped us out back in 2011. So, I mean, there's a lot of cooperation that way among utility companies and all other ways to get people out of the dark when this kind of thing happens.
Absolutely. When Superstorm Sandy hit the Northeast, I think 6 different utility companies from other states sent crews to New York, New Jersey, Connecticut to get power back up. Now we've got crews going down. It's a reciprocal agreement that's been going on for years. So what happens when that crisis hits you? And I saw somebody on the news yesterday in an absolute panic. They live in Tampa, and they hadn't prepared for the hurricane because all of the coverage said it was going up the East Coast, and it wasn't going to hit Tampa head on. Well, now it was heading right for them, and they were understandably nervous. So how do you handle a crisis when it's on top of you? And the first thing is don't panic. No matter how dangerous the situation, panicking only makes it worse.
Yeah, it leads to reactions that you're going to regret and hopefully live through.
Right. So, yeah, your first step is don't panic. Your second step is look at the short term. What do you need to get through the immediate crisis? And take steps to make sure you have that. If it means getting to a shelter, do that. If it means stocking up on food that's, non-perishable, so you have food in the house if electricity goes out, do so. And do it as quickly as you can. The longer you wait to prepare, the more difficult it is. So think about the short term. What do I need immediately? Then think about the longer term. Okay, what if power is out for 2-3 weeks? What if you can't get back into your home? Where can you go? Where can you get help? Find out, again, what you're going to need and how you can get it. If you work for a company, a lot of times companies will provide help to their employees. I know a number of companies going back a ways to Hurricane Katrina. Companies in the New Orleans area made arrangements for their employees. Some set them up in hotels for a while, but all of them made arrangements for them to be able to telecommute so that they didn't have to worry about getting into an office. They didn't have to worry about where they were. They had their paycheck coming in. So even though all this was going on, they still had their income. And, when you're losing everything, like you do, like they did in Katrina, like they did in Harvey, like some are in Irma, knowing that you have money coming in is very important.
Absolutely. And obviously, from the company standpoint, planning like that helps them out too, because obviously you can't let business go down despite crisis either. So it's very, very important for businesses to have this stuff planned out. And obviously taking care of their employees has got to be their priority number one, whether things are going well or whether there's a crisis hitting them in the face, because without employees, where are they going to be?
Right. And we've talked a lot about personal crises, but when a crisis hits a business, the same things apply. You want to be prepared for a crisis, but you do need, in the middle of all of this, to keep your business running if you are a business owner. Because you have, if you have employees, they're depending on your business. Your customers are depending on your business. What resources do you have as a business owner to make sure your company moves forward? And what can you do for the community with other business owners, with other nonprofits, to make sure that the community moves forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that you can do in business to hedge against this thing is there is something called business interruption insurance, which takes over the act of God and so on and so forth. I mean, I think I've told you this before. We had a manufacturing company that we used to run, family business, and a terrific thunderstorm spiked one of our CNC machining centers, which we used to charge $100 an hour or more to machine parts, and that thing was down for a couple of weeks. And because we had an insurance policy for business interruption, that income was replaced by that insurance policy. Didn't help us with our customers that much, but at least it helped the business. So,
right, that could very well have been the difference between continuing business and going out of business.
Yep. And getting back to your bride, there's such a thing called event insurance too. So if she had a big wedding planned and stuff that got canceled by the weather, there's insurance to cover that also.
Right. There's the insurance policies, and there's things you can do on a regular basis to make sure you're prepared. Most businesses today rely on their computers. Back up your computer. Do it on a regular basis and do it frequently. And, while any kind of backup is preferable to none, the best thing is to have at least one copy of your backup stored off site. So if you back everything up to a portable hard drive and you store that in a safe deposit box, or you back it up online to the cloud where it's on a server, hundreds of miles away, having all of your data off-site means if a hurricane hits your office and your computers are fried, all of your data is still safe. You can back it up to a new computer and continue your business. Now, we're actually coming up on the end of our time here. So before we end, I do want to send out our thoughts to all of the victims of the hurricanes that are going on, to the first responders that go into these hurricanes, to the first responders and the victims of 9/11. Just know there are people thinking about you, and we're doing what we can. So, Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway that our listeners should have from this?
Well, obviously it's planning, but as you started this out with, it's perspective. It's keeping cool in the fire, as hard as it is to do.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway for me is don't panic. And remember, as difficult as a situation is, as long as you are still alive, you can get through it. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch us every week at blogtalkradio.com/success showcase. You can also find us on the Apple Podcast app and the iTunes Store. Remember, make this week your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.